to extinguish the ruchnius, the godliness, the holiness in Torah mitzvahs. And that was the main intention. So you said yesterday that the Yevanim's Avodah Zarah, so to speak, what they worshipped in a sense was intellect, was logic. And therefore, if somebody decides to be philosophical and intellectual by studying a book which is called Torah, that's also a good idea. But what they were against and what they were was good morning to take out the Kedusha. And that expressed itself in the fact that physically they did not destroy the Beis Hamikdash. They did not destroy the Mizbeach. They didn't destroy the objects in the Beis Hamikdash. What they did was they made a tummy. They didn't destroy them in there, but they made all the oil tummy. They put, as I said yesterday, trait animal on the Mizbeach, brought Avodah Zarah into the Beis Hamikdash. So that means that what they were doing, a second, yeah. I know the news is important, but I'm sorry. Pardon my ignorance, I didn't know what to do. So this answers one of the questions, or maybe two of the questions. One of the questions was, in Al Hanisim, where the words are very precise, it says the Yevanim wanted Lahaviram me'al chukei ritzonecha, from your chukim. And we asked the question, why does it mention chukim? It should say Lahaviram, from your mitzvahs. Or if anything, not going to, by the fact that it says chukei ritzonecha, it's if they mainly wanted us not to perform chukim. And the same with the other expression, lashkicham terasecha, we should forget your Torah. These precise wordings exactly express this point that we're bringing out. They weren't against doing mitzvahs like don't kill and don't steal, those things that are logical, ethical. On the contrary, it makes sense. They were also cultural people, and they had, our whole thing was that people should be cultured. But what's chukim? Chukim are mitzvahs that don't have any logic to it. There's no seichel to it. And those are the mitzvahs that express that this is something godly, and that's what they were against. So therefore, in terms of mitzvahs, the main mitzvahs that they were against were those that go into the category of chukim more than anything else. Because the truth is, in mitzvahs, there's so much when you, especially today, when you try to speak to people who don't observe mitzvahs, and you want to inspire them to keep Shabbos, inspire them to keep Taras Mishpacha, inspire them to give the children a Torah education, inspire them with Yiddishkeit, there's ways of explaining it so logical that they can understand how living a life with a Shabbos in the middle of the week or at the end of the week will enhance your entire life, and it can make perfect sense. And people who are married, and you explain to them how the laws of Taras Mishpacha could enhance the marriage, it makes perfect sense to them. And all these things are true, but this is not the ultimate reason for the mitzvah. The real reason behind it is because that's what Hashem wants. And in reality, we don't really understand why, because it's deeper than logic. But these mitzvahs, Hashem sort of allowed them to take on a presentation, to take on an image of logic. It also makes sense. So this is what they were against. Now I would ask you a question. Where should a person have more chayas, more gishmak? In doing mitzvahs of mishpatim, that makes sense, or doing mitzvahs of chukim?
I think it's easier to get excited about it if you get it. Like if you're able to understand it, then it's easy to see like the beauty of it. Chuk is harder to do that.
So which mitzvahs do I observe with more pleasure? Yeah.
At the same time, with chukim, you're doing it not just want to do it, you're doing it because Hashem wants to do it, right? Shouldn't that give us more pleasure?
Ideally, yeah.
Right. I mean, what you're saying is true, what you're saying is true. It's easier to do mitzvahs that you can understand, but once you understand the real purpose of mitzvahs, that it's really about connecting to Hashem, where do I feel that connecting to Hashem more? Dafka when I do something that I don't understand. In other words, where would you feel more connection to Hashem? Eating delicacies on Shabbos or eating maror on Pesach? Something that's bitter and hard to eat. In other words, dafka because it doesn't make any sense. That's why the Alter Rebbe says in the Maimer that if the Eibishter would have commanded us to chop wood, and we tell us in advance, you're accomplishing absolutely nothing by chopping wood. Nothing begashmius, nothing beruchnius. But I want you to chop wood. The Alter Rebbe said we would do it with the same passion, with the same fire, like we do mitzvahs now. Why? Because if this is what Hashem wants, that's all I care about. So those mitzvahs that don't have logic and reason to it, those are the mitzvahs that you feel more that I'm doing it for Hashem once. When you do something that I understand and I have pleasure and I feel what I'm going to gain from it, there's more of me in it than Hashem. So that's why they were mainly against chukim, because chukim are those kind of mitzvahs that are above seichel. But here there's another point, again, where Chassidus gives a whole new light to even chukim, that we understand chukim different than we understand chukim on the surface. On the surface, the way they explain chukim is, what is the chukim? It means something we don't understand. So what's behind it then? The answer is, we don't understand, but Hashem understands. I remember reading in a sefer, somebody, a great Torah scholar, so he writes a very good mashal, that imagine if a doctor tells somebody to do something, it makes no sense to him. He doesn't see the connection between this pill or this medicine and the condition that they have, but the doctor tells him to do it. So even though he doesn't understand, but he trusts that the doctor, who is a medical professional, has a lot of experience, he knows what he's talking about, and he understands that this particular medicine or this exercise or whatever it is going to make me feel better, and I trust it. So we trust Hashem that He knows what's behind the chukim, even though we don't. Is this really the way we're supposed to do chukim? So this is an external way of doing chukim. What can be external? I mean, what can be better than that? Because Chassidus explains it deeper. What does Chassidus explain? And actually, it's already found in earlier writings, in the writings of the Maharal of Prague. By the way, the Alter Rebbe writes in the introduction to Tanya that what he writes is based on the books of sages. It's right in the front, in the cover page. It's based on the teachings of earlier sages. He's referring to the Baal Shem Tov and the Mezritch Magid, and even earlier he's referring to the Maharal of Prague and the Shalom, that Chassidus is based on their teachings. So Maharal of Prague already says this, and he says that if I would say the Eibishter has the reason and logic behind it, in a sense, I'm limiting the Eibishter, that he himself is bound to logic. I mean, that's not true. Hashem is above and beyond intellect, beyond Chokhmah. In fact, when we learn Chassidus, it's simple. Chokhmah is one of the spheres, the first one that Hashem emanated of himself. So Chokhmah is the first. What's before Chokhmah? Ein Sof. What's Ein Sof? Ein Sof means infinite. It's not Chokhmah. So what is it? Well, you can't explain infinite because we're finite. But it's not Chokhmah. Chokhmah is something which Hashem decided to put into the infrastructure of creation. If he would have decided differently, there wouldn't be such a thing as Chokhmah. In other words, when Hashem wants something, it's not because it makes sense. To us, it doesn't make sense to want something if it doesn't make sense, because we're already into this infrastructure of Seichel. But Hashem, He is above logic. Again, if Hashem is bound to logic, some opinions even say that Hashem is Chokhmah. Hashem is the essence of Chokhmah. Let me try to explain that a little bit. You know that Chokhmah is the first sphere, right? That means everything in the world has in it Chokhmah, and Chokhmah is the highest thing. How does that make sense? Let's say I'm looking at a tree. There's Chokhmah in a tree. Tree doesn't have any brains. What does it mean there's Chokhmah in a tree? There's chachma in a spaghetti. There's chachma in an apple and a pickle. Yeah, Leah says, yeah. How? You ever had an intellectual conversation with a pickle?
No, but the Chokhmah of Hashem is inside, like, because Hashem make it alive.
Hashem makes it alive, but I'm saying, where's their sphere of chachma? The 10 spheres are in everything. So where's their sphere of chachma in vegetables and animals? We can see they have a certain degree of intellect. But let's say vegetables or things that are inanimate, water, rocks, diamonds. It's precious, but there's no chachma there. There's no brain.
We eat it, we make it.
But not the thing. Yeah.
It's concealed. Right? And of course,
You're saying that the
reason why we can't tell is because maybe it's more concealed in that than it is in other things that seem to actually have intellect.
you're saying they have intellect?
One
No.
that we can't see, or maybe it's a different kind.
I mean, the way that farms, the way like tree grows, seed. That's what's in the ground.
What? Say that again.
Like the way that they're formed. It's not the way that they're formed, like trees grow in the seed, like in the ground, or even like minerals come together to make rock, to make water, or something like that.
Okay. So what you're saying is like this. There's chachma in everything in the world, meaning everything in the world that exists, there's a science to it. There's a science to how an apple is an apple. There's a science how a bird flies. There's a science how a bee does what a bee does, how an ant does what an ant does. We're not saying that the tree has chachma, but there is chachma in the tree. That is the science of which the tree is based on. You follow what I'm saying? The Eibishter created a tree with chachma, and scientists study it will tell you, wow, there's such brilliance in the way a cell was put together. Just like a cell has no brains, but a cell is put together with chachma, right? And the DNA is put together with chachma. So a tree, an apple, any object in the world is put together with a certain chachma. That science is found in the way it's structured, in the way its composition. Everything is based on chachma. Now, question number 2. So which comes first? The object, the bird, or the chachma in the bird that a bird is able to fly? The chachma came first. So that's what it means. That chachma is the beginning of everything in the spheres and everything in the world. The first point of it is the chachma, and then the details get formed based on that chachma. Let's take it a step further. All the chachma in the world is chachma in math, there's chachma in medicine, there's chachma in ethics and morals, there's chachma in every single field. I think it says there are 7 kind of chachmas, 7 categories of areas of wisdom. Of course, chachma in science. But all the chachmas, the basics of logic is all the same, right? When you're studying math, it's different than studying science. When you're studying science, it's different than studying medicine. But the basics of intelligence, the basics of logic are all the same. It's just applied to a different subject. But the logic and the way logic works and what is logical, what's not logical, all these things, the basics of logic are the same. Does that make sense to you? Is it logical?
Yes.
Right. So in a sense, there's logic, and then there's the principles of logic, the pillars of all logic, the source of all logic. So Hashem is not physical, true, but you know what he is? He is the essence of all the logic, all the chachma of everything that was created in the world. So Hashem's chachma is infinite, 10 times infinite, 30, 100,000 times infinite, a gazillion times infinite, but he is infinite what? Infinite chachma. You're still limiting him. If you say that he's chachma, that means he is limited. And that would mean that when he created the world, he was sort of limited to create it a certain way based on the principles of chachma, because he's the essence of all chachma. Yeah.
But he's the essence of all. He created it with chachma, but just because he created it that way doesn't mean that he's defined by it.
No, right. That's true. But there is such an opinion that it appears, even I'm talking about not an opinion in science, opinions in Torah scholars, where it appears, and in fact, the Rambam appears to be saying that. If you remember the words in Tanya where it says, Hu Hamada, Hu Yadeya, Hu Yadu, Hashem is the wisdom, He's the one who understands, He's what is being understood, which basically is saying Hashem is the essence of wisdom. That's what it looks on the surface. The Alter Rebbe adds that even the Rambam agrees that there's more to it. What's more to it? The essence of Hashem is not wisdom, is infinite. And infinite is not wisdom, is something which infinite produces. But infinite itself is not limited to wisdom. It's a different category. And we can't ask, if it doesn't make sense, then why? In that place, there's no why, there's no logic, because logic is something which is sort of created by the Ein Sof. Yep.
So in that way, we could say that sort of the essence of wisdom is Hashem, like it all leads back to Hashem, but Hashem is not.
Right.
The definition is not the essence.
Right. The essence of the whole world is wisdom. The essence of wisdom is from Hashem. But Hashem himself is not wisdom. He's infinite. And he chose to create wisdom with the rules and the axioms of wisdom the way we know it. And he could have created the world differently, completely. Could have created a world that the most precious thing in the world is a banana peel. And 2 plus 3 makes sense that it's 93. It could have made sense if he would have created the world that way. This is very hard to understand because most people don't see it that way. They see that there's nothing higher than intellect, logic, that's it. But the truth is, no. Hashem is his essence is infinite. And infinite means undefined in no way whatsoever. And if we would say Chokhmah, that is a definite definition. Is this clear? So now we're saying something different. Chukim means not just that Hashem knows the reason. It's beyond reason. You don't need a reason. There is no reason in that realm. There's no need for a reason. It's a desire that's above, beyond reason. So what is it? Why is it? It's a silly question to ask because it's infinite. We don't understand infinite. It's like people asking, so what did it look like when there was no time and space? Impossible to picture that. Now, even though this is a sort of deep philosophical thing, it makes a huge difference in the way we're Mekayim mitzvahs. So, in a sense, the Rebbe says in a Sikha that the Yavanim would have even agreed for a person to observe Chukim by saying, but Hashem knows the reason. Why? Because when you observe mitzvahs, and even though you say, I don't understand, but Hashem understands, you're still basing it on logic. The only thing you're saying, I don't understand, but the doctor understands. I don't get it, but the scientist, he knows it. I don't understand, but Hashem knows it. But I'm still not doing something which is out of the range of Seichel. But if I do mitzvahs chukim the proper way, means Hashem said this, it's irrelevant whether it makes sense or it doesn't make sense. It doesn't have to make sense to me. It doesn't have to make sense at all. It comes from a place which is beyond logic.
So it's a lower level to just even just say, I don't get it, but Hashem gets it.
Right.
That's even lower. It's not the highest level.
No, because then I'm still saying that there's a need for logic, but I don't have the logic. Hashem has the logic, and that satisfies me. The other way is I don't even need that to satisfy. Well, I need to know that Hashem wants it, and in that place where He wants is beyond logic, and that's really the source of all the Torah and all the mitzvahs. Yep.
So if we want things, like we say we want things, that's kind of like our desire for things, that's from the heart, but our intellect is supposed to relate to that. But obviously with Hashem that doesn't apply, but how does that?
Again, our desire you're talking about?
Right, so if Hashem wants something, then that's from somewhere higher than logic, but if we want something, it's from somewhere lower than logic.
Right, generally speaking, when we want something, there's a logical reason behind it. If there's anything that we want that's beyond logic, that has to come from a place in my neshama that's also beyond logic.
Okay.
We'll soon talk about that's yichida. And this gives a whole different explanation to a saying in Gemara. The Gemara says, this is the way the Yetzer Hara works. Today it tells you to do this. Tomorrow it tells you to do that. And before you know it, it tells you to do Avodah Zarah. In other words, nobody wakes up in the morning after doing Torah mitzvahs and the next day decides, I'm doing Avodah Zarah. It's usually a gradual what is it, degression, a gradual process of going down. First, you're a little bit light about something, you do a little bit less here, a little bit less there, a little bit less there, and eventually you end up doing Avodah Zarah. That's the simple meaning of the words. So there's a Sikha, the Friedrich Rebbe, who says there's a deeper meaning. It doesn't mean Yetzirah tells you to do Aveira, it tells you to do a mitzvah. A mitzvah, so how can that lead to trouble? But it's the Yetzirah telling you to do the mitzvah. In other words, like this, I'm doing a mitzvah, and the Yetzirah comes and says, does this make sense? Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. There's a very beautiful, deep reason and understanding to this. So what's wrong with that? Tomorrow you do another mitzvah. This also makes sense. It's such a deep reason and understanding for this. He tells you to do one thing and gives you the reason, another thing gives you the reason. He gets me to a place where I become sort of conditioned that I need to understand the reason behind what I'm doing. And then something comes up that I don't understand. And because I'm so conditioned that everything in Yiddishkeit I understand, and here something comes up that I don't understand, I'm already not so passionate about it, or I'm not so committed to it because I don't see the logic behind it. And that's how slowly he gets a person. In other words, if a person will do Torah mitzvahs and put seichel aside, just Kabbalah Selah, Hashem said so, and that's it, it wouldn't lead him down. But if a person approaches Torah mitzvahs and it's all based and everything has to be explained and understood, and I find an answer and I find an explanation, but I sort of become, my observance becomes to a certain extent, it hinges on that. It depends on that. There'll always come a situation where I don't understand, or I'm thinking for sure it wouldn't make sense to do this in these circumstances, in those circumstances, probably I don't have to do so much today. And slowly that leads a person to become less committed to certain things. And then eventually it goes off completely, because there's going to come a time and a situation in life where there's going to be a clashing between the mitzvah and my personal interest or personal gain, whether it's financial, whether it's health, whether it's honor, something there's going to be a clash. And when that happens, the brain starts thinking a little bit differently. And if I'm basing everything on my understanding, I will understand things differently. So let's say, for example, somebody is going home to visit a relative. And again, I'm not talking about somebody who's their first steps in Yiddishkeit, but let's say I'm already established, I'm going there, and I'm thinking, I want to have a good impression on this person. If they're going to see me talking to myself before I eat an apple, they'll think I'm crazy. So I won't make a bracha. And the logic is, I'm going to do it so they should be more acceptable of Yiddishkeit. And it makes sense. At that moment where I feel the pressure, I don't want to feel weird, it's going to make sense. Or other things that could relate to other things in Yiddishkeit, where a person that's compromising. And once you do something like that, another thing comes up, you do something like that. And then slowly it gets lost. Because there are stories of people who were incredible, brilliant Torah scholars, and yet they went down, sometimes very down, to the point of converting to Christianity. How could that possibly happen? It's because they're learning Torah in a way where they're purely focused on the logic, on the intellect, on the seichel. And then once seichel becomes the sort of the controller, and everything is based on seichel, seichel is something which is influenced by my invested personal interests. And I start seeing things differently when I have a certain situation. And slowly but surely a person will go down. So this is the famous Gemara that says if a person doesn't learn Torah properly, it could become a drug that brings the opposite of life. How's that possible? Because not only that, you can actually use, like the famous example would be someone like Mendelssohn. Moses Mendelssohn was the one who founded the Haskalah movement. He was a Torah scholar. And he wrote a book, which is a commentary on Torah. And not only that, he was frum to a certain extent. I saw somewhere it says that if he would be having a meeting with German dignitaries, he would say, I'm sorry, I have to stop, I have to have mincha. So he was frum. He never intended, with all his changes and all his sort of compromises and making things light, to come to a place where people won't be keeping Torah mitzvah at all. His own children converted to Christianity. But how does a Torah scholar like that? Because when you learn Torah in a way, I know he was very passionate about Jewish kids going to university and becoming intelligent and that was his whole approach, that if we would go and mix and mingle with all the people in the universities, we would go there, we would become like everybody else, there'd be no anti-Semitism. This is all part of it, and therefore he made certain changes in Yiddishkeit that should be adjusted more to the modern times. There were more things about him, but I'm saying what happened was it went to a place which is beyond what he even dreamt about. He didn't mean it to go that far. But once you start using logic and going down, it goes down. Look what's happening in the world now. Who would believe that, the atrocities that Hamas did, who would believe that intelligent people could be defending them and attacking those that are attacking them? Who would believe that it should be coming from the elite, the most intellectual place in the world, which are the colleges? And not Stam colleges, Schmeckel College, Harvard, and all the big intellectual places. How could it be? Dafka from there. And they have all the seichel and all the reason. We see from this that logic, you can't beat them. Logic, you say, you give a reason for something one way, they'll find the reason. If they have an interest, they'll find the reason the other way. There's no explanation why it makes sense to them only because of anti-Semitism. It doesn't make any other sense. It's only because of that they want to take on this approach, and therefore it makes sense to them, because otherwise, how could something like this make sense when you see what was done, what they're threatening to do in the future? They're not hiding it. They're saying openly, this was a rehearsal. We plan to do this and even more. So of course you have to get rid of them. And Israel's been doing this for years, taking the hits, and not attacking them because they don't want to hurt anybody else. And then finally comes a point where they did things which was, beyond anyone's wildest imagination. And yet it makes perfect sense to people who are intelligent people that we have to come out and condemn Israel. And by doing that, of course, you're supporting them. So we see that seichel, any logic you have to do a mitzvah, someone can come on with a logic not to do it. Any logic you have to explain something which the Torah says don't do, you can have a logic that explains yes to do. So therefore, when you do Torah mitzvahs based on logic, because that's not really the ultimate reason for Torah mitzvahs. The real reason is not the real reason. The real basis is because that's Hashem's will. The reason is once you understand it, it penetrates more, you're more excited about it, but that's not the basis. My basis has to be because it's Hashem's will. So this is where they were at. The Yavanim wanted to take all that away and just make it, everything should be based only on, should be logical, and like I said before, cultural, but not godly. Okay, so what else can we explain based on this? First of all, I just want to draw your attention to number 15. Yeah.
But why Hashem created some things like beyond our understanding in order to us to have this bitachon in Him?
Why did He create things beyond our understanding?
Beyond logic, yeah, that we can explain in a logical way and like.
No, it's the other way around. Hashem is beyond logic. Hashem created logic. Because through logic, we can have more of a excitement about the mitzvahs, that my brain understands it, so it penetrates the person in a deeper way. But really, beyond logic, that's the essence, that's Hashem. Hashem is beyond logic. He's the one that created logic. It's not that He created things that are beyond logic. In other words, certain mitzvahs remain that way, they're beyond logic, and certain mitzvahs, Hashem took these mitzvahs and put them into a way that they could be understood logically. That just makes sense to us. So this is called Chachma Siyav. In other words, this is called Chachma of Klippa. Look at number 15 and 17, which means there's Chachma in Klippa too. And that's why you can have Chachma telling you to do something which the Torah says, and Klippa will have Chachma telling you not to do it, and they'll give you reason and logic, and it'll make sense to them. I think I mentioned this once in class, that the Rebbe once said, even Kibbud Avraham, what could be more logical than Kibbud Avraham? And nevertheless, Klippa can come along and explain that there's no reason to honor parents at all. Because everything they did for themselves, not for me. They enjoy whatever nachas they get from their children. So they do it for their pleasure. They don't do it for me. And therefore, I don't have to honor them. In other words, the Rebbe is showing that something which is purely logical, if you don't want to do it, it'll make perfect sense to you that you don't have to do it. And the same thing with many other things.
You could argue that you didn't ask to come into the world.
Right? That's one of the arguments. I didn't ask to come into the world. It's your fault. So, Taka, how could you overcome such a klippa? So the answer is, like I said, you have to connect. And you have to do the Torah mitzvahs coming from a place which is beyond logic. And that is the Yechidah. In other words, the only way to overcome a klippa like this klippa is by, how could I do, I'm a logical person, I'm a human being, I have brains, I have intellect. How can I do something which is beyond intellect? Because I have something in me which is connected to that aspect of Hashem that's above logic. And that is my Yechidah. So the way to overcome this klippa is by revealing the Yechidah. That's what it's all about. And this is really what Chanukah was all about. The Chanukah war, the Chanukah was the enemy on Chanukah was defeated through Mesiras Nefesh. The fact that 12 people stood up to fight against a huge Syrian Greek army, which didn't make any sense, and Apiteva, they should have been killed and crushed. So they had Mesiras Nefesh. In other words, this is a time where Mesiras Nefesh is beyond logic. The only way to be able to overcome this klippa is by bringing out this in your Mesiras Nefesh, which is beyond logic, and that's the union of Yechidah. So Chanukah is connected with the Gili of Yechidah. And this explains number 8. They found a jug of oil. By the way, oil in general represents Yechidah. Oil is like the essence in everything. I told you I'm sure you all know there's a sikh of the Rebbe which was translated in English. It's called On the Essence of Chassidus. And the whole sikh is about the relationship between Chassidus and oil. And oil, how oil is the essence of everything. Everything has oil in it. Is the essence of everything. So the oil, when it comes to Torah or the neshama, is the essence of the neshama, the Yechidah. And why the chaysam, why the seal of the Kohen Gadol? Because also within Yidden there are different levels of Kedusha. Every Yisrael has a certain Kedusha. And then there's a Kedusha of a Levi, then there's a Kedusha of a Kohen. The highest level of Kedusha is Kohen Gadol, which means that just like in every individual neshama, there's Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechidah. In the collective neshama, which is all the Yidden, there's also Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechidah. And the Kohen Gadol is the Yechidah of Klal Yisrael. So the fact that they found oil, and the fact that the oil had the seal of the Kohen Gadol, that is all reflecting the fact that the koyach that they had to overcome this big test and this big war was with the Gil of Yechidah. So all in all, this explains the big question, why do we celebrate the miracle with the oil, not the war? Because we said before, the war is the main thing. The oil is the next thing. Once you win the war, then the oil is found and you light a menorah. But first you have to win the war to get access to Beis HaMikdash. So the answer is no, this was a spiritual war. This wasn't a war like other wars. This war was mainly a spiritual war. And therefore, the spiritual war is expressed in the menorah, which is fire, or represents spirituality, with the oil and the holiness of the oil. That is the main mechama. Once the Yidden were able to overcome the impurity and win on that level, then they won the war b'gashmis. So really, it was a ruchnisdik war. This is even in Nigla, in Halacha, it explains why Purim there's a mitzvah to have a male, and Chanukah is not a mitzvah to have a male, is because Purim, that's when Yidden were being threatened b'gashmis. Haman wanted to destroy Yidden b'gashmis. Chanukah, They didn't want to. And the fact, many of the people in the story of Chanukah that were fighting were Hellenists, were Jews who were Hellenists. It was a spiritual war. It was a war for assimilation. They wanted Jews to assimilate and take on the Hellenist culture. So the war was a spiritual war, and the victory was a spiritual victory. So the main victory expressed itself in the menorah, not in Gashmis, and that's why we don't have to have a Gashmis Suda.
Oh, Rabbi,
Yeah. Thought I heard a voice. Okay. So the Rebbe's father, Rabbi Yitzchak, writes that the two Yom Tovim, Purim and Chanukah, these are only two Yom Tovim that the Rabbanan established. All the others are in the Chumash Midoraisa. These two miracles and these two victories are similar to our generation, which is his generation, with the two main challenges we had. One was communist Russia, and the other was Hitler and Machshmai. What was happening with the Nazis, they just wanted to destroy his begashmas, just like Haman. They weren't out to convert people. They were out to just destroy. In fact, even Jews who were perhaps not even Jewish because their mother wasn't Jewish, but their father was Jewish, they also killed them, which means they were out just to wipe Jews off the map physically. That's like Purim. Chanukah is the opposite. Not the opposite, but Chanukah was different. Communism was like Chanukah. They were out to destroy. It was an ideological war. They wanted us to take on communism as an ideology and not have the ideology of Torah. So in fact, many of the people who were extremely active with communism, spreading communism, the war with communism, were actually Jews. And they had their own division. They were called Yevsektia. They were fighting Yiddishkeit. So it was an ideological war. Chanukah and Purim is the same thing. Purim was a physical victory, and Chanukah was a spiritual victory. Of course, everything is connected spiritually, but mainly it was a different thing. So here they mainly wanted that. In fact, number 9 is from the Gemara. It says that the Yevonim, that the Greeks said to the Yidden, Kisvu lachem al keren asher, write this down on the horn of an ox. There's reasons why they chose that. What should they write? Ein lechem chelik b'lekei Yisrael. You have no portion in the God of Israel, which means it's about godliness that they wanted to eliminate, and not about the other things. The other things were fine, but the godliness that's what they wanted to take away, so that we should observe the mitzvahs in a cold, logical, intellectual, cultural way, without the neshama of Yiddishkeit, which is Hashem. So obviously it means that when Chanukah comes around, if a person has any kind of issue with this kind of Yetzer Hara, this is the time of the year that we have a koyach to overcome that, to be more aware, more sensitive, more conscious of the godliness in mitzvahs and the godliness in Torah, and to be able to connect on such a level. So next class we'll explain how it answers all the other questions. And we'll try to go into more subjects related to Chanukah that we didn't touch on yet, but hopefully we'll get to it. Okay. Just do the attendance, sorry.